monkey to the chimp. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da, said the chimpy to the monk. All night long they'd chatter away, all day long they were happy and gay, swinging and singing in their honky-tonky way. Abba-dabba-dabba-dabba-dabba-dabba means monk, I love but you. Babba-dabba-dabba and monkey talk means chimp, I love you too. And a big baboon one night in June, he married them and very soon they went upon their Abba-dabba honeymoon. A big baboon one night in June, he married them and very soon they went upon their Abba-dabba honeymoon.
That is Elly Lonon singing Abba Daba Honeymoon. Thank you for tuning in. I have an episode that I'm really happy to share with you all today. It is an interview with a really excellent trainer who I'm pleased to call a colleague, Ferdie Yau. And, though I actually recorded this with Ferdie almost a year ago and then kind of took a hiatus with the podcast. And I just wanted to mention that since then, he has taken a job with Behavior Vets, which is a highly respected veterinary practice that specializes in behavioral medicine. And I'm glad to be able to share this interview with you. Also wanted to mention that we are still doing free 30-minute private virtual sessions with all clients, new and old. We're offering one to anyone who is interested. If you have not taken us up on that offer yet, please do so. You can sign up at schoolforthedogs.com. Not sure how long we will be offering this promotion, but we feel it is something we can do during quarantine to help people who are either facing issues with their dogs having to do with the massive changes in lifestyle that we're all experiencing, or if you're just looking to learn a little bit more about training, maybe looking for some ideas of fun stuff that you can do with your dog, go ahead and sign up at schoolforthedogs.com. We are able to pay our trainers to offer these sessions thanks to our scholarship fund. So thank you to anyone who has already donated to the fund. You can learn more about it at schoolforthedogs.com/fund. And right now we are putting together a mosaic in our studio while we're closed. It's being built by the artist Jim Power. Jim Power is the artist who has done all the mosaics on lampposts throughout the East Village for like 3 decades. And he is doing this for us. And if you donate $100 or more right now, we will thank you with a photo tile that will go in this unique mosaic. You can learn more about that at schoolforthedogs.com/mosaic. And I will link to it in the show notes as well. And lastly, if you're enjoying this podcast, please do leave a review, but also reach out and say hi to me. I would love to hear from you. Not seeing a whole lot of people these days, and means a lot when I hear from listeners. When I see your names in my inbox, it is hugely positively reinforcing. So please reach out. Just say hello. Annie at schoolforthedogs.com. Okay, here is the episode.
And now for something completely different.
Hi, my name is Annie Grossman, and I'm a dog trainer. This podcast is brought to you by School for the Dogs, a Manhattan-based facility I own and operate along with some of the city's finest dog trainers. During this podcast, we'll be answering your questions, geeking out on animal behavior, discussing pet trends, and interviewing industry experts. Welcome to School for the Dogs podcast. So, Ferdie, can you please introduce yourself?
I'm Ferdie Yau. I'm a professional dog trainer. I am the founder of Sit and Wiggles Dog Training. It's based out of Riverdale in the Bronx.
And how long have you had that business?
I've had that business for, about 10 years now. And I wasn't always doing it full time. I think I've been doing it full time for about 7 years.
So tell me about your education, I guess, before you became a full-time dog trainer, because, well, you tell me, how did it all start out?
Okay, well,
What did you study in college? I'm curious.
in college, I went to University of Michigan, and I studied ecology and resource management. So when I was in college, I took a whole bunch of animal behavior classes, and that's really all I wanted to do was just sit in class and watch animal behavior.
Oh, I feel jealous. I wish I'd ever thought to take
Yeah.
animal behavior classes in
Yeah,
college.
and always been very interested in studying animals.
Was there a time when you were a kid where you realized, like, that was a world that interested you?
I think it was just when I was a kid, everything was always about animals. Every book I read was about animals. I remember one time.
Where did you grow up?
Port Washington, Long Island. Yeah, I remember one time my mom actually yelled at me for reading too many animal books because every single one of my books was about animals. She wanted me to kind of branch out and read something else, something different. But hey, here it all worked out in the end.
And were you particularly interested in, like, going to the zoo, or were you interested in pets, or?
When I graduated from school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and my first job out of college was as a naturalist with the Audubon Society, and this was out in Oyster Bay. So I was kind of the guy who would take the rehabilitated raptors, like red-tailed hawks and owls, and I'd go to schools and kind of give a presentation about, hey, this is a hawk, and they have talons, and this is what talons look like. They'll bring out snakes, and so we would...
You were like the guy who you would have wanted to have come to your school, I guess, if
Yes.
you were a little kid with your head in the animal book.
Exactly. So, I got my experience kind of handling animals then. That's my first experience handling animals, I guess. And, I did the education thing for a little while, and then I became a zookeeper at the Central Park Zoo.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's actually where I started to learn how to train animals. Before that, I grew up with dogs and cats, and I was always responsible for taking care of them. But I really didn't know what training was about until I actually got to the zoo.
How do you become a zookeeper at the Central Park Zoo? Do they put ads on Craigslist?
It is. It's a tough industry to get into. It can be very competitive, actually. And right when I started, and this was back in 2002, this is when zoos were actually kind of making the transition to become a little bit more, as far as their keeper staff, to become more scientific, and they started looking for zookeepers, hiring people with degrees in biology, zoology, something related to animals. In the past, working at a zoo was just a lot of manual labor. I mean, you were really a poop shoveler, a professional poop shoveler, and so you didn't really need to know a whole lot about animals, and but you had to be, physically fit to do it. So a lot of the old-time zookeepers were just people who, a lot of them came from different types of industries. Some people were like accountants, and they decided, like, hey, I don't like this job, and they became a zookeeper. But right when I got started, I started as an intern first in the animal department at Central Park Zoo, and then worked my way up and become a zookeeper. So my first full-time zookeeping job was at the Bronx Zoo. It's a much bigger zoo, obviously, so there were more positions that opened up there. I was there for about 9 months and then moved back to the Central Park Zoo where I got my start. I just liked the smaller zoo, the family atmosphere over there.
What is life like as a zookeeper?
Well,
what is your day like?
Well, you come in, usually get in early.
So is there one zookeeper? Are there many zookeepers?
There are many zookeepers, and you're assigned to different areas of the zoo. So I was usually assigned to the polar area in the Central Park Zoo. So that included the penguins, the sea lions, the polar bears.
Oh my God, the best part.
Yeah, the harbor seals, river otters. Now they have snow leopards, but where they have snow leopards now is river otters. It really was. I was in my mid-20s, and when I went to work, I got to play with sea lions and polar bears, and I couldn't really ask for anything more than that.
Do you know about the famous polar bear who had the stereotypy in the 90s?
Yes,
I
Gus.
remember seeing
Well, that
this.
is
Tell me about
Gus and Ida.
Is he still there?
No, Gus is passed in 2013. But really, Gus, I didn't realize it at the time, but Gus was my first behavior case.
Okay.
And
That's the one I'm talking about?
yes,
okay,
that is the one, yeah.
Stereotypy is maybe a word that we should define, but
yes,
you go for it.
So stereotypy is a behavior that can be, it's related to anxiety, stress, and you see it in animals, especially in animals in captivity. So Gus's particular case was, he was known for swimming laps in the pool, or he could go for hours on end without stopping. And in some cases, stereotypical behaviors can become very damaging to animals' well-being. And in this case for Gus, it was clearly an expression of his stress of being a very small animal exhibit in the middle of New York City.
So sad and yet so interesting. And it's one of those things like, I mean, I remember going to see him when I was a kid in like the early 90s maybe, and it was cool to see this big polar bear foot on the glass, because he would do these laps and push his foot off the glass, and it was like something to go see.
Yes.
And yet it was actually, I mean, now I know it was this animal who was suffering deeply for like many, many years.
Yeah, it really was. And you didn't even have to go into the zoo to watch it. You could actually stand right outside of the zoo, outside the gates, and you could actually see part of the polar bear window where he would swim up and he'd push off at the same exact spot. So he became quite famous as the neurotic or the depressed polar bear of New York City, which, people kind of played with that because, people called New Yorkers neurotic. So so it kind of made sense that our polar bear was neurotic as well. So that was really my first experience in working with a serious behavior case. And really, it wasn't until kind of later on in life as a professional dog trainer, I started to realize what an influence that experience had on me and how I approach a lot of my cases now when I'm working with my clients. But yeah, when I got into work, I would sometimes spend a whole hour preparing his exhibit, just adding more enrichment, which are basically, think of just puzzle toys. Toys for, things to keep the animal engaged in their environment, try to stimulate natural behaviors like hunting, foraging, scavenging. So, did a whole lot of trying to really challenge Gus's brain, really, to help reduce the pulling, because in one sense, he probably was extremely bored. In another sense, we wanted to really improve his well-being because he saw that it wasn't healthy for him to just keep swimming laps over and over and over for hours. It could last for like 4 hours at times.
Wow. Isn't it interesting how so much training just comes down to like giving animals something to do?
Yeah, it really is. It's so much of it is trying to be proactive. And, you hear people say, especially when I'm working with their dogs, their family dogs, they talk about how smart the dog is and how active and energetic the dog is. And then they expect the dog to kind of, sit at home by himself for 10 to 12 hours a day while they're at work and do nothing. And then they come back home and they complain about how the dog is just jumping all over him or too energetic. So really a whole lot about, caring for an animal is trying to understand, what makes them happy, activities that can help them make them happy and more content. And that can help.
Just yesterday, someone said to me, well, what kind of breed of dog is easiest to train? And I'm curious what you'd answer. I can tell you what I said. I said, I generally think more in terms of the individual than the breed, but sort of, generally speaking, we consider animals that were bred to work with humans to be smarter because they have like intelligence that's more attuned to ours. So sheep dogs, herding dogs, that kind of thing. But they might be more intelligent as we see intelligent. However, that does not necessarily make them good pets. Like a dog that is like a super vigilant, super smart, active brain dog might not actually do well in New York City because like they're too vigilant to be out on the street and we're trying to herd every taxi and they can't be in an apartment all day.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's, everybody wants that smart dog, but then if you have a very smart dog and the dog doesn't have anything constructive to do with its time, usually they get themselves in trouble.
They make their own jobs.
Yeah,
right?
they make their own jobs, exactly. So, really, depending on your lifestyle, if you're somebody who is active and likes to do a lot of things with your dog, then yeah, go for it. Get that really smart herding dog if you want, but also, understand, what kind of environment you're bringing that dog into.
You might say like a lazy basset hound or Great Dane is actually quote unquote smarter to live in a city apartment.
Yeah. Yep.
They're more evolved to that environment.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, yeah, sometimes you're better off as far as having a pet in your home. And if you live a very busy life, you're better off having an older couch potato, the one that, just is kind of maybe a goofball, maybe,
It's a different kind of intelligence.
Yeah, it is, that they're content to just hang out with you.
So how did you go from the polar bears to dogs? Was that a goal or did it?
It wasn't. So when I was at the zoo, I was working with the polar bears, learned how to train all the animals there, like sea lions and river otters.
Were you doing clicker training?
It was all reward-based training. It wasn't we didn't use clickers.
Were you training like husbandry type behavior?
Yes, yeah. All of it was especially working with the sea lions where we would teach them present their rear flippers for voluntary blood draws.
Right. So for those who aren't familiar with training at zoos, I know that there are zoos where they do, fun exhibits where they're, or sea park kind of stuff with the dolphins do tricks. But most of the training, from what I understand at zoos, is about teaching them to voluntarily be handled, make it easier to take their blood, right?
Yes, it is. While at the Central Park Zoo, you could watch the sea lion shows and it's kind of fun. You see them do tricks. But the priority behind the training programs is for the animal's health and well-being. That relationship you develop with the animal, trainers, really good trainers can tell early on if there's something that's bothering the animal, if they're not performing a certain behavior as well as they usually do. So really, it's more than just teaching them to do tricks. It's really teaching them how to kind of cooperate in their own care so that we can take a good close look at them, look at the flippers, look at the body condition. With the bears, we could trim their nails, for example. We trained them to put their paws onto the bars of the cage. When we train the polar bears, it's the protected contact, so we're not in there with the bears. We're actually protected by basically the cage, and but they could present their paws up onto the bars of the cage, and then we could clip their nails safely without having to have the vets come in, restrain them, or anything like that. So yeah, that's what a lot of the training at the zoo is done, all reward-based, positive, reinforcement training. And then, how I became a dog trainer really it wasn't my immediate goal. When I was at the zoo, I went back to grad school. I went to Columbia to get a master's in conservation biology. And after I went to grad school, studied animal behavior a little bit more. And when I left grad school, I got a job as a biologist with New York City Parks. But when I was working as a biologist, I also kind of missed working with animals, that interaction, that direct contact with animals that I had at the zoo. I really missed it. So I decided to start do some dog training. And I started working with Biscuits and Bath, which is a doggy daycare here in New York City. And met a bunch of other really great trainers there that, we consider our colleagues and our friends now. So, I was working as a biologist for New York City, and I was moonlighting as a dog trainer part-time for about a year or two. And then after that, I left Biscuits and Bath and started Sits and Wiggles. Again, still doing it part-time. I was still working full-time as a biologist. And I didn't switch full-time until 2012. And then that's when I decided that what I really, really loved doing more than anything else was training animals. And while I felt really like wildlife conservation was still a big part of me, and I really didn't want to leave that field, but I just felt that going to the dog training business was kind of the right step for me at that point. And then lucky enough, I was a year later, hooked up with the Gotham Coyote Project, and now I am back. I'm studying the coyotes in New York City. My dog is a trained coyote scat detection dog.
Yeah, so how did you get involved with, first of all, Until I knew that you were doing this, I didn't know that there were coyotes in New York City. Are there coyotes in Manhattan?
There
Are there coyotes on my street?
There are sometimes coyotes come into Manhattan, and it's usually in the winter or early spring. But really in Manhattan itself, there are probably not enough green spaces for them to live in Manhattan.
Where is your work primarily?
So our work is primarily in the Bronx, where we have a little bit more space. And despite the reputation that the Bronx has, there are actually very large parks in the Bronx, so very large green spaces in the Bronx. And that's where we're studying the coyotes. They're coming down from Westchester in Connecticut, and we have probably about 5 resident packs in the Bronx right now.
How many are in a pack?
We estimate, can be, depends on the season. Like right now, this is the pupping season. So the packs are larger right now. The pups haven't really left the packs yet until later in the year. So at this time, a coyote mother can have anywhere between 3 to 7 pups.
And is a pack just one family like
Yes,
that?
yeah, it's one family. So this time of year, if the conditions are right, you can have 7 pups or more. So that pack can be very, very big at this point of time. But, usually we consider about 5 or 6 individuals to a pack, at least adults. So the estimate that we're going with right now are maybe 30 to 40 individual coyotes in New York City total. But most of them are living in the Bronx.
And is it okay that they're there? Are you trying to get them to not be there? Are you trying to make their lives better? Like, what is the mission?
Well, the mission really is to study how they're surviving here in New York City, and then also to educate and learn how we can coexist with coyotes. The fact of the matter is they're living here, and they've been here for several years actually, and they're here to stay. What we know about coyotes, and just in general in coyotes and across the country, we've been trying to get rid of coyotes for over 100 years. Farmers, hunters have been, trying to kill coyotes for a very long time. And coyotes are so adaptable that basically their response to the hunting and the really targeted, persecution is they have expanded their range and diversified their niche. So that's really one of the most fascinating things about coyotes. Coyotes first were living out in the West in open habitats like grasslands and prairies. And now over here in the East, they are inhabiting deciduous forests, and they are living in urban areas as well. And along the way, as they had migrated from the West to the Northeast here, they had hybridized with wolves and domestic dogs. So that's one of the interesting things about the coyotes here in our area, is that genetically speaking, they aren't identical to the Western coyote. Here they are about, as far as what we know about them, they're about 65% coyote, 25% wolf. And 10% domestic dogs. So they're mutts here. The coyotes are mutts here, and sometimes you might hear them referred to as coy wolves or coy dogs, which I think is the media's way of kind of sensationalizing what they're here, the animal. But yeah, they're coyotes. They're a little larger than their Western cousins, and they can live in forests and live very close to humans as well. But they're here to stay, really.
What do they live off of in the Bronx?
So we're finding they're eating birds, lots of birds, usually pigeons. We're finding a lot of pigeons.
I always wondered where the dead pigeons are in New York City.
Yeah, maybe the coyotes are cleaning them up.
Seriously, there's so many pigeons, but you rarely see a dead pigeon.
They go away.
They just go away?
Maybe they find a quiet place to go
Or pigeon retirement homes?
Yeah. But yeah, the coyotes here in New York City are eating, we're finding lots of birds, rodents, rabbits. Some of them in the Bronx, where they can get access to it, are eating deer as well. Most of them are probably eating roadkill, where we haven't seen a lot of evidence of coyotes actually hunting adult deer as of yet. They could probably capture younger deer, like fawns, but adult deer are probably still a little too big for coyotes to take down. And in places where they're living closer to, in more urban areas, we're finding that there's a higher percentage of anthropogenic sources of food. So they're eating basically leftovers, trash. So one of the things that's part of our project is understanding what these risks are and how people can safely manage their trash, basically, to avoid attracting coyotes to their neighborhood and where they live.
Do they present a danger to people who have like small dogs in their yard?
Yeah, coyotes are always going to be a danger to small dogs and cats. So, obviously in Manhattan, people don't really have backyards, so you're not really worrying about it. In the Bronx, there's some neighborhoods like in Riverdale where some people have houses with yards where you want to be more aware about that situation. But yeah, coyotes, they can look at dogs as competitors or they can look at dogs as food as well.
So what does your work there involve specifically?
So it involves camera trapping. So we put these wildlife cameras into the parks so we can monitor the coyotes. The cameras are heat and motion sensor cameras, and they're hidden in the parks. So anytime any warm-blooded animal walks in front of the camera, it takes a picture, snaps a picture. So we can detect the presence of coyotes there, and we can also see, if we're lucky, see evidence of breeding, and that takes kind of a little bit of luck and a little bit of skill of understanding where you think a coyote might put their den up. And the other part of our studies are collecting scat, which is coyote feces. And my dog is trained to sniff it out in the woods so we can collect it for genetic studies and for diet studies. So we can figure out what they're eating and also who's related to whom among the parks, and try to figure out how many different individuals there are out there.
So interesting.
Yeah.
So how did you train your dog to be a coyote scat smelling dog, and does it come in useful in other situations?
Yeah, well, really, it's a job that dogs have been bred to do for a long time, which is using their nose. We have here in New York City, we have dogs that are bed bug detection dogs. Right. So my dog at first I started teaching my dog how to sniff out a scent inside boxes, inside little containers. And then once she started to get that idea of how to find something for me, then really what I started to do was I had coyote scat samples, which I obtained from the Queen Zoo. The Queen Zoo does have coyotes in captivity, so we were able to get some samples from the Queen Zoo. And what I did was I hid the food and the scat inside the box. And my dog was already trained to find the food. So at this point, what I was doing was I was associating the scent of food along with the scent of the coyote scat. And I gradually faded the scent of food out. So basically my dog started to recognize that whenever she smelled the scent of coyote scat and she found it for me, she would be rewarded with a game of tug, or she'd be rewarded with one of her favorite treats. And then we started training the dog out in the field, out in the woods. And once that went well, then we were collecting real wild coyote scat.
So
and she's been doing really well with it.
So what's her signal when she spots coyote scat?
She will make very distinct eye contact with me, and then she'll sit down by the scat. So when we learn more about the coyote, how they're surviving here in New York City, we have a better idea of how to avoid conflicts with humans. And what we're learning so far are that coyotes are really trying to do as much as they can to avoid humans, which is great. So for one thing, coyotes in more natural settings, they have a crepuscular activity pattern. So in other words, they're usually most active at dawn or dusk. In urban areas, coyotes here in New York City, as they do in other urban areas like Chicago and San Francisco, LA, they have shifted their activity patterns to become more nocturnal. And we believe, as it's consistent with other cities across the US, we believe that this is a behavior to avoid humans. And when coyotes can, they are staying in green spaces and green areas. So they're really staying well hidden in these parks, and they're not really hanging out in your neighborhood around the corner. They're really, trying to stay deeper in the parks. One of the reasons why you don't see a lot of coyotes in Manhattan is, number one, it's an island. So just that fact alone makes it harder for coyotes to actually get to Manhattan because they have to cross a bridge, they have to swim, take the subway, they have to take a tunnel. We still don't really know for sure how they're getting to Manhattan, but they're probably, there are a couple areas where we think they're crossing over, like maybe by railroad on down near Inwood Hill Park up in northern Manhattan, or the Broadway Bridge. It's a short crossing there. But in Manhattan, other than Central Park, there aren't really a lot of big green spaces for them to really hide out. So you may find coyotes occasionally in Manhattan, but I think what happens with the coyotes that they quickly find out that, this place is a little too intense to live or to even set up a family. So most of the coyotes, once they get to Manhattan, they're probably looking for a way out. And sometimes they find a way out, and other times they find a way into more human-dominated neighborhoods, and that's where we have to go in and try to catch them. The Parks Department will do that and try to catch them and get them out of Manhattan.
Are there other local wild animals that you've studied or that are interesting to you?
Just the fact that we're studying coyotes, we start studying their interactions with other animals like skunks and raccoons. So, one thing we're finding out is that they become very territorial around breeding season. So when we placed a camera trap up near a coyote den, and during breeding season, what you find are that all the skunks, coyotes, and the raccoons and the possums all they leave the area. And
they've adapted too.
Yeah,
to the coyote family.
They either learn to avoid coyotes, or the coyotes are actively, chasing them out. And then after the breeding season's over and the pups have grown up and they are not, just hanging around the den as much and they're more mobile, then you see all the other animals come back. So that's kind of fascinating. That also tells us a little bit more about, how humans should avoid coyote dens. That we understand that coyotes are more territorial around breeding season, which makes sense, they want to protect their young. And we actually had a case up in Riverdale where a coyote family decided to have their den right in a private community near some homes. They chased a man walking his dog out, and then coyotes were actually seen kind of hanging out on people's porches around their homes. And this obviously can be very frightening for people especially if they have small children. And one of the great things was that we already had established a good relationship with the community because we knew the coyotes were in the area. We had put cameras up there already. So since we knew that because of our camera work, we saw that, there are pups here, there's a den here. So we knew that increase in aggressive behavior in where the coyote chased a dog walker and his dog out. We knew that it wasn't because the coyote was all of a sudden becoming aggressive. It was because the dog has gotten too close to their den. And what we advised the community to do was just stay away from this area for the next 4 weeks. And after about 4 weeks, what we found were the pups grew up and they became more mobile. And once they became more mobile, they were able to leave the den and the parents took them out of there. So we didn't have any other negative incidents after that. Once we told people just, leave the coyotes alone for a few weeks, and we put up a camera there so we were able to watch the pups behaving like puppies, almost like puppy dogs. So we got a lot of information about coyote behavior early on.
You did some people training.
Yeah, and we did some people training. So
was there something? Did I remember the Trump golf course? Was there something?
Yes. Last year we had some coyotes at the Trump golf course, which is over at the Ferry Point Park, which is right at the base of the Whitestone Bridge over in the Bronx. And what was going on was, this was in the fall. The coyotes, it was really more of the pups. And now at this point, they weren't really pups anymore. They were becoming adolescent coyotes. And they were chasing the lawnmowers. They were jumping on golf carts. They were kind of, becoming a little bit more bold and hanging around the groundskeepers and even the golfers. So that became a problem, became a little scary. So we went out there, Gotham Coyote went out there. We kind of rotated shifts, and we would go out to the golf course early in the morning at 5 in the morning and really at the crack of dawn to watch these coyotes. And one of the interesting things that we found were we could consistently see the adult male, but we couldn't find the adult female. And we believe that something happened to the adult female of that pack. So basically, we don't think something happened to mom. Maybe, she could have gotten hit by a car. We don't know, but usually cars are the largest source of mortality for coyotes, urban coyotes. In normal coyote family, what would happen is, one adult would probably go out, or some of the older siblings and the adults would go out and go hunting, while one of the other parents would probably stay in the den and watch the pups and keep them close to the den, keep them out of trouble. But since the adult female, mom, was missing, it was on dad to take care of the pups and go out and hunt. And what we found was, we found a subadult male who was always with the younger pups. So we think this was probably a older sibling that became a babysitter. But didn't do as good a job as mom. So these young pups, as pups do, were very curious about, golf carts and lawnmowers, and they were causing a little trouble. So once we went out there and we were observing and watching the coyotes, their behavior changed, because we found that the coyotes responded differently to people who were trying to just go about their day and do their jobs. Like if you're a groundskeeper, you're just mowing the lawn or something. You're not, you might watch where the coyotes are, but you're trying to do your job. But as opposed to if you had a whole bunch of researchers out there with binoculars and standing on top of the hills in the golf course, we were standing on top of hills so that we could get a better perspective. And when the coyotes noticed that there were humans actually watching them, directly watching them, they behaved differently, and their behavior changed within a few weeks. And within a few weeks, the behavior of jumping off golf carts and chasing the lawnmowers, that stopped.
Wow. Like the police activity.
Yeah, it was just like, hey, there's these large primates watching us, and then
isn't it like quantum physics or whatever?
Yeah, I think they know when, there's another animal watching them.
Scarecrows, you needed like scarecrows.
Yeah, I think we need something like that. And what they told us, the golf course staff, they told us that after we were watching them for a few weeks, that all that behavior stopped and they went back to business as normal. The coyotes went back to kind of leaving the humans alone. So we're going to see this year. We don't know right now. As of right now, we haven't checked the cameras yet. We don't know whether they have a new family out there yet. Mm-hmm. We don't know whether the adult male found a new mate to have, another family. So we'll see.
If people want to get involved, is there anything that volunteers can do?
GothamCoyote.com. They can read more about the project there. And right now, if you're interested in volunteering, there's some information on the webpage where they can contact one of the founders of the Gotham Coyote Project. We're not yet set up as a nonprofit organization yet, so we haven't really gotten to the point yet. We're handling, volunteer projects, but it is a fascinating place. It's a good place to start if you're interested, and you're welcome to learn more about it there.
Do you feel like you train dogs because they are the animal most in need of training, as opposed to in the environment in which you live, as opposed to a particular affinity towards dogs?
Well, yes, I think so. I think training dogs, number one, I love dogs. And yeah, it is. It's one that most people need to be trained at this point. So it's the one that helps me pay the bills, that's for sure. And the one that's actually, most in demand. I know people do, want to train their cats, but you don't get as much of a demand for cat training as you for dog training.
Well, I feel like most people don't think about cat training until there's like a major problem.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Dog training is a little bit more like a routine thing. People get a dog and they think they need training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, it is a good thing. Really, realistically, these are animals that are, not that far removed from those wild coyotes that are living out here.
Right.
And really, they have sharp teeth, and they're living with our families, with our children, with our neighbors and friends. So I think it's very important that we have well-behaved dogs so that our communities are safer.
What do you do when you encounter people who are hanging on to dominance theory or the notion that you need to have like a special energy in order to train their dog? How do you respond as someone who has this zoo background?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there is that attitude that kind of the bigger and the more aggressive the dog, the more forceful that you have to be with the animal. And I come from a perspective where I worked with polar bears, and I worked with one of my favorite animals I've worked with was a 300-pound female sea lion named Scooter. And here's an animal that they live in groups as well. They live in social groups, just like dogs. So if you want to talk about, that dogs are social animals and you have to show dominance, well, here's a sea lion. And sometimes, my response can vary from, you think you're a tough guy? Go ahead and show a sea lion, who's dominant, who's the boss. You're not going to get very far. But, really, for the most part, when I'm talking to people, I think people just have an idea about the dominance idea because that's what's out there. That's what's on the internet. That's what they see on TV. And they're really just misinformed.
Right.
And really, I feel most people I've worked with are deep down inside, they actually don't want to scare and intimidate or hurt their own pet dog, and they do it because either they've seen it on TV or they read it on the internet, or they've hired a trainer who told them that this is how you're supposed to train dogs. And what strikes me is that when I was training animals at the zoo, we train every single species in the zoo with reward-based training, with positive reinforcement. We never use force on those animals.
I mean, you can't. I guess you could force the polar bear to give you his paw for nail clipping, but you would need
oh yeah, you're not going to get very far with that animal. Yeah, I was give the example of this sea lion. I'm working with Scooter. She weighs 300 pounds. There is no physically, there's no way I can overpower that animal. So when you're working with animals like that, you learn very quickly, okay, especially animals that can hurt you, okay, or even kill you, that you learn very quickly how to gain their trust and not use forceful training methods that can damage that trust, that can make them respond with defensive aggression towards you or to someone else. So you learn very quickly how to really use positive reinforcement, because you need to have that trust so the animal wants to cooperate with you. Because if Scooter didn't want to work with me, she could just jump in the pool and swim and just leave and just ignore me. But what she did was she chose to work with me because we had such a good relationship. She even chose to work with me when we did things like getting back to the husbandry work. We had to give her eye drops every single day, and usually twice a day. And, how do you give eye drops to a pet dog? And most people are, if your dog has an eye infection, you have to restrain your dog and hold your dog down and then put the eye drops in. So with Scooter, we had trained her to rest her head onto my hand. I'd make a fist, and she just rests her head right onto my fist. And so basically it's targeting, and she will hold her head there. And then I would very easily just drop eye drops into her eye. I'd wait for her to open her eye, and when she did, I'd put an eye drop in, and then she was rewarded with herring, which was her favorite type of fish. And that's what she worked for. There was no restraint there. She did it all cooperatively. And so, when I show this example to people, and I show them that, we train all these other animals with positive reinforcement, but for some reason, when we go to dogs, it's slap a choke chain or a prong collar, or even worse, a shock collar on them, and just start jerking them around or force them to do this and force them to do that. And, it just
I think it's
doesn't
just
make any
because
sense.
They are so adaptable that they let us do that.
Yeah, and that's and just because a dog is so docile and sweet and submissive doesn't mean it's okay.
Right.
And while you might get away with it, there might be a time where you're gonna have a dog that's not gonna be or as submissive or as docile, and they may they may actually respond with defensive aggression if you try to force them to do something they don't want. So it really is. I try to inspire people to find a better way.
I get so frustrated with like watching someone like Cesar Millan who's telling people it's all about your energy, because it's like, how do you make someone change their energy? Because it's so subjective. Like what one person's energy. And I did some training with chickens a few years ago. And teaching them like color differentiation or shape differentiation.
Oh, cool! Yeah.
And, I don't think that chicken gave a shit about my energy. The chicken just wanted to know where she needed a peck. And yet somehow with dogs, we get all wrapped up with this notion of like there's some special quality in me that's going to color the situation.
Yeah, and that's what gets people in trouble, where you start thinking that you have this special energy, that all animals love you or all dogs love you. You're gonna get yourself in trouble there. And I try to really preach this science and how the science works. And I just knowing from experience, because I've worked with so many different species, I know that you can train any animal with this science.
Isn't it amazing how surprised people are by that? I remember when I was going to go do chicken training, I said to someone I know who is like an incredibly intelligent person that I was going to go train chickens, and she was like, "But you're a dog trainer." I was like, "Yes, but something, dog trainers do sort of for fun to hone their chops." And she was like, "Oh, so chickens and dogs learn in the same way?" And I was like, oh my God, of course they learn in the same way. I can't believe this is news to you, but I think, probably would have been news to me before I...
Yeah, absolutely. Was it the Bob Bailey chicken camp?
It was with Parveen Farhoudi,
Parveen.
Who was is a student of Bob Bailey.
Yeah, yes.
And then Bob Bailey, who worked with Breland Bailey, and they were students of B.F. Skinner's.
Yes.
It was really excellent. I think anyone who has a chance to do that should do it.
Yeah,
it was a 5-week program, and you could do 1 week, or you could do 5, and I did 1 week, and I would have done 5 in a heartbeat.
It is. It's so fascinating. I always tell people, especially new trainers, they're not always young. New trainers can come from all walks of life at any age. But I always tell new trainers if you want to become a better dog trainer, train a different species. Because I think one of the great terms I gotten from Susan Friedman, Dr. Susan Friedman, is our cultural fog about dogs. All these misconceptions.
Static.
Some myths that we think about dogs, about being the alpha and being dominant, that gets in the way of how we actually train dogs. So I'll tell people, go train a cat, especially if they're volunteering at my shelter and they're interested in training. I will tell them, I will go over there and teach them how to train cats, because now you can't think of all those things of, show dominance to the dog. You try to show a cat dominance, that cat isn't going to work with you.
Or get a gerbil.
A gerbil, a bird, anything, really.
I think it would be cool to get a really long target stick, a big umbrella or something, and try and do target training with the rats in the subway. I've always thought
my God, that would be a fascinating experiment.
You'd have to tag the rat somehow, or get really good identifying which rat is. It's you get a paint gun or
something like that. Yeah. That's I actually know biologists who are studying New York City rats, so they might be interested in some of those ideas.
So interested in that. Is there a favorite kind of case that you like to take on as a dog trainer?
I always like those cases where a dog is maybe suffering from anxiety related to just fear of the environment, fear of people. I really love it when I see animals kind of recover from that, or at least improve, because it's not, you can't always cure every behavior problem. And I think that's also related to my experience with the polar bears with Gus, because I saw an animal that was suffering all the time. That's my goal when I was working with him was just to make his day as better.
Did he end up going on medication?
When I was working there, I think before I started there, I think he was on medication briefly. And I don't know if this is official or not, but anecdotally, I think people thought that it was written that Gus may have been the first zoo animal that was ever put on behavior medications. I don't know if that's officially true, but that has been kind of put out there. But when I was working at the zoo, Gus was not on any behavior medications anymore. And when we started there, his pacing was pretty intense. Once he started doing his pacing in the pool, for the most part, you couldn't break him out of it. You could, you could try to call him to come inside into our holding rooms, but he wouldn't come in because he was just kind of in a trance, really, in that moment. And what we did, it was mainly another keeper named Celia Ackerman and myself. We were in the bear dens the most during that period of time between 2002 and 2005. We started to become a lot more creative with the types of enrichment and toys that we gave him. A lot of times we used to just give him kind of new objects, new toys in there. But now what we started doing was we started giving him puzzles. So for example, we had this huge plastic, it looked like a big plastic ice floe basically, and we cut holes in it and then we hid toys inside. Inside those toys we hid food maybe. So it was like
just like working with dogs.
Just like working with dogs. Yeah, we put a puzzle inside a puzzle inside a puzzle. Like kind of like those little Russian dolls that you open up.
I've had cases, I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, where like somebody's come in and wanted to hire me to come work with their dog, and I'll be standing in the shop and I'll be like, okay, like you could do, we could do some training sessions and it's going to cost you, this many hundreds of dollars, or like you could buy this toy, and this toy, which will cost you $50.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to go farther with these $50 worth of toys than you are with like a professional trainer sitting there with you, because so much of, what we think of training can be solved by, just giving a dog's brain something to do.
Yeah, it really is. There's so many parallels with that. Just when you have an animal that's more content, they, because they're physically and mentally fulfilled with, activity and training and brain exercises, a lot of those behavior issues go away. Yeah. So when we started doing that, we started upping the challenge for him, basically. We also made a more concerted effort in our training sessions with him to work on a lot of these husbandry behaviors, like teaching him to do those nail clippings, to present his rear up to the cage so that we can give him a voluntary injection instead of having a vet come in and have to dart him. So we tried to see what we could do. We looked at his everyday life and we tried to figure out what can we do as his caretaker to reduce his overall daily stress.
Here's another question that I'm curious your take on: carriage horses. Carriage horses in New York City. I used to be, before I knew anything about training and thought very much about animals, I thought, let's have more carriage horses rather than fewer carriage horses, because it's better for the environment to travel by horse, and let's, I don't know, my thought was, cool old-timey thing, I'm all for it, and I like animals, and it's more animals around. Then I started, when I started to get into animal training and sort of think more about how animals are living in a human environment, I thought, no horses. We shouldn't have any horses in New York City because of the cars. It's just not safe. It's not dangerous. It's not a natural environment. And then I kind of, I guess, began to think, well, maybe it's a good thing for horses to have something to do, and we are giving them jobs, and we've bred them to have jobs. And anyway, curious your thought.
I think I actually am on the side of, I don't think we should have the carriage horses. I am not so sure. And, this is saying I don't really know that much about horses. I've worked with lots of species, but I actually never worked with horses. But I don't know if that environment's the best environment for them.
That's kind of, I think, where I am now, too, is thinking that maybe horses do need something to do, but maybe the Central Park is not the place for it. Yeah, I think, if we ask those horses, they probably enjoy doing some work, but I'm not sure if, pulling a tourist through Central Park, every day is going to be their choice of what they actually want to do. So I think we could definitely provide a better environment for those horses. Yeah. I worry about them with the cars.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. It's just so loud there. And, and every once in a while you hear about a horse that escapes or, something happens to the horse. I mean, it's rare, and I've seen a lot of the handlers there. Generally speaking, most of the handlers I watch, seem to be really kind to the horses. But again, I think this is one of these these old-timey things that it's just hard for people to let go. And it's more of it's kind of, it's a little selfish because are we really doing what's right for the animal, or are we just doing it because we think it's cool to have horses and, to sit in a horse carriage that pull you through Central Park?
Yeah, if we could get rid of all the cars and only have horses.
Yeah.
And we could horseback ride to work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, love
There could
that.
be bike lanes and horse lanes. Great. Anything else that we haven't touched on that you think we should cover?
I don't think I can really think of much right now.
You want to
went over a lot. Yeah.
Try and answer that question?
Yeah, let's go
I can
answer some questions.
Edit it or not. All right.
Hi, Annie. I just ran across your podcast today. My name is Dee. I really enjoyed this episode, and I'm looking forward to listening to a bunch of them. Currently, we have 2 pit bull mixes. One is very brilliant and listens good and learns quick. The other one is challenging. He is very cat-like in the fact that he likes to chase shadows and lights and, shiny things, and it's very odd. I have no experience with this kind of behavior, and despite our best efforts, we have not been able to break him of this habit. He'll run outside, see a shadow on the fence, and bark at it and bark at it and bark at it. And then also when our lights are on in the kitchen and they're reflecting on the fence, he wants to go bark at the light. So if you could address this, or if you have something that addresses this, we would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Any ideas for Dee here? Interesting, if we were talking about intelligence, and she says one of her dogs is smart and the other one's not. And it's the one that she says is not smart that's having the issues. But
Yeah.
might be just another intelligence.
Yes, I think that's an interesting case. And I think when I hear something like that, that's not behavior that's typical of most dogs, chasing shadows and lights like that. One of my first questions would be, how intense is the behavior? How frequent does it occur? And depending on that answer, that's something I think she may need to see a veterinary behaviorist. And I know you know what a behaviorist is, but just for the listeners out there, a veterinary behaviorist is sort of a veterinary psychiatrist. So some animals, and this is related to Gus the polar bear, they get into a behavior that's a little OCD, like swimming laps in the pool over and over for hours. And chasing lights and shadows is another type of behavior that can be a symptom of anxiety or stress in the animal. So that would be something, first I'd love to get a video of that and see, what exactly is going on there, how intense it is. I'd like to know how frequently it happens, during a day. Is this once a day? Is this only a couple times a week? Is this happening several times a day? And I'd like to get a good idea of the animal's overall daily activity. How much exercise are they getting? How much training are they getting? And, sometimes these lines, like with Gus, it wasn't about trying to stop him from pacing once he was in the pacing mode. It was really trying to be proactive and prevent it from happening in the first place.
To begin with, right?
Yeah.
It's like getting a bigger picture of what's going on. That's why it's so hard to just look at one specific behavior. Like when somebody says, I only want to work on the fact that my dog is peeing on the couch. Well, we can't really do that.
Yeah, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. So I'm sure this behavior isn't happening in a vacuum. I'm sure there's more to it, and we would need to see, is this dog getting enough exercise and mental stimulation? And, so there's a training part of it. I was just trying to teach a dog to have a better response to lights and shadows, to a more appropriate response that we can train from the human end. But also, I think what's more important here is does this dog have a constructive outlet for its energy? So if we're talking about a dog that's very, very energetic and very smart, okay, and I tend to find it, the smarter the animal, the more behavior problems they have, because smarter animals tend to notice more stuff.
Right, I was saying, it's the vigilant dog.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and the ones that aren't as observant, or I don't know what you want to call it intelligence. If you want to call it that. Sometimes they may miss Oh, there's that shadow
Isn't it
that's...
the same thing with people? It's like the neurotic people who are very intelligent and unhappy.
You notice all the little
Woody Allens
details.
who are
Exactly, really,
it's
really.
like the less observant people who exist happily in the world.
It just goes to show you how we're all so connected, how, as different as we are as animals, we are so similar. And that's one of the biggest things I've learned from just working with all these different animals that, when it comes down to it, so much, we are all so similar. But yeah, in that situation, if training itself doesn't work, then I would seriously consider behavior medications to help complement the training. It's not a substitute for the training, but it's to, sometimes in some cases, the dog's stress level is so high and it's triggering this light chasing or shadow chasing behavior that your training may not be very effective because the animal is already so stressed.
Right.
So that's where behavior medications can kind of come in to help you open up a window into the animal's brain so that you can start to kind of teach the animal a more appropriate response to the shadows and lights and help reduce whatever anxiety that animal is feeling, associated with it. So that's a very, very interesting behavior case. So I think that's something that you would definitely need to see a professional trainer.
It's funny how trainers refer to cases that are like behavior cases where I resisted at School for the Dogs calling certain cases behavior cases for a really long time because I was like, it's all behavior. Right?
Yeah, it is.
You're teaching sit, that's a behavior. But in the parlance of training, we when things are issues, we tend to call them behavior cases.
Yeah, it is. We try to make a distinction between, are we just training a dog that just needs to learn how to sit, lie down, and stay? It's the good manners training, or, it was called obedience training.
Right,
versus, this is probably involves a little bit more about emotions in the animal, how the animal's, dealing with stress in its daily life.
It's really more like problem training.
Yeah,
but I
problem
guess like
solving.
behavior is like, it's a word like when you use a nice word instead of...
Euphemism?
Euphemism.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
Behavior is like a euphemism for
issues.
For
issues, yes.
like reactivity is
Yeah.
a euphemism for aggression. Well, Ferdie, thank you so much. I think this has been really interesting.
Well, thank you.
And I'm excited
it was a
to
pleasure
share all
coming
this
down.
with everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. You can support School for the Dogs podcast by subscribing, leaving a 5-star review, telling your friends, and shopping in our online store. Learn more about School for the Dogs and sign up for lots of free training resources on our website, schoolforthedogs.com. And hey, do you like stickers? You can get $10 to make any kind of stickers you want at stickermule.com when you sign up at schoolforthedogs.com/stickers.